that she's going to read for us.
I guess I should unmute. I am going to read I would like to read two poems by a Palestinian poet named Nasser Rabah, R-A-B-A-H, an old friend and South Euclidean friend of mine and a poet, also a translator, has a set of poems coming out in the Manhattan Review that are translations of Rabah's poems. And the first one I read will be his translation of Nasser's poem. And the second one appeared in the New Yorker, December 30th, 2023, by Nasser. So if you can stand listening to two poems, I have piles of his work. He's really a wonderful poet. This first poem is called We Are Not Iron. We are not iron, O God, so that we can be melted down every year. We are not copper or lead that they fire among the armies and leave behind after the end of the war as mere ammunition and ashes. We are not stones, O Lord, that soldiers demolish on their daughters' birthdays. We are created to die, yes, but once, not 1,000 times. We were created to have a house around us, not us around the house, searching for the remains of our flesh. Are you not the Lord of hosts, the Lord of servants, the Lord of houses, and the Lord of trees? Why, Lord, in every war are we in the wrong place? No fire to bake the loaf for us, and no wine to forget. We are not iron, O God, so that we can be smelted every year. But, O God, even iron has one shine and it has rust. Lord, tell me what's wrong. And the second poem is just, the title is the date, December 30th, 2023. And the day goes by, and tanks, and the sky a festival of kids flying kites, and blood flowed behind a panting car. And a day goes by, and the planes and the tent of the displaced makes a bet with time. Winter is late. And a day goes by, and the snipers, and the market itself has no salt. So I said, no worries, the merchants have plenty of sadness. And a day goes by, and artillery, but my neighbor's funeral passes along, slowly. Why rush at a time like this? And a day goes by, and the newscasts, and when evening came, it was a bit joyous to find us all there with none missing except the house. And that had a different translator. And the only thing I want to add is that on this is very strange. I feel strange about it in a way because the JCC has been so closed basically to us and our opinions. But on April 3rd, which is a Thursday evening, there is a reading of poets called Four Poets Speak Their Truth at JCC with Ricky Santer, Phil Turman, David Swerdlow, and me. And it's a little scary, but there we are. We're going to be there. Phil Turman is the fellow who translates Nasser, and I suspect he'll bring some of his translations as well as his own poems. And that's at 7 p.m. on April 3rd.
Thank you, Charlene. Can you post information about that in our Signal chat as well so that people have it?
Well, Signal makes me go into a fetal
I can
Okay.
help you. I
But so,
Yeah,
understand.
good.
yeah.
Okay. Make sure
I
that
mean, I
Not that
still
I'm good
get
with
it,
keeping
and
up
I
with
have
Signal,
like
but
thousands
I
of men.
totally understand. Tanya will help us. I just want to make sure membership sees it. That way we can have our
Yeah,
membership.
yeah, it would be
Or-
nice if folks could.
Yeah.
I
who invited you? Who organized that?
Well, it's so interesting. Ricky Santer did the organizing, and we are also, so now we're a troupe. We all just kind of hung out at the Youngstown Literary Festival, and suddenly Ricky turned us into a troupe. We're also reading at the Maltz Museum in a suburb of Cleveland, very close to that date. Let me see if I can find that. Actually, I'm not sure when that is, but it's happening at some point.
That's
Um,
good.
so yeah,
It'll be interesting to see how that goes at the JCC.
definitely. You know, because there were one of the sponsors on there was Jewish Columbus, and um, and Phil emailed me and he said the JCC logo says we stand by Israel.
Oh, no.
You know, he was a little surprised to see that because he runs um, a, a, a reading series of Jewish poets at the Buffalo JCC, and they
Mm.
have nothing like that on their
Mhm.
page.
No, it is Columbus.
Yeah, that's what I
Uh,
told him because he lives in Pennsylvania. So I said that's the Columbus JCC.
yeah.
Yeah,
So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We're gonna get to Reverend John's video and presentation shortly, but I thought that it would be nice to kind of give like a little update about everything that's going on in Palestine right now, just to kind of like situate us in this moment before we get into all of that. So um Uh, Farrell touched on the meeting with the Jordanian king today, and that it seems like he's kind of holding strong on not wanting to allow for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and take people in. Like Farrell had mentioned, he did say he would take 2,000 children who need medical care. But it seems like for now, and then I also saw that Egypt put out a statement that they will not, that, they're still strongly opposed to this and they will not be taking people who are ethnically cleansed. So seems like that, those countries are holding strong, which is good. Trump, I think it was yesterday, he said that all Israeli detainees must be turned over to Israel by noon on Saturday. Um, or, he's said various things about what is going to happen if not, but basically it sounds like they want to break the ceasefire if that doesn't happen. And if people remember, this is contrary to the ceasefire agreement that his administration you know, put in place. So they were part of the team that was working on this, and um, the agreement was that people would be released over time throughout many weeks. And so to demand that everyone be turned over immediately, and if that doesn't happen, then they're just going to throw away the ceasefire is pretty alarming. Did I see Tall? Did you have a hand up?
Yeah, sorry, I put it down because I think you clarified. I was just wondering if it sounds like you mean that basically Trump wants Hamas to go beyond the terms of the ceasefire, is what you're saying, and release actually all of them at once?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like they're demanding. And then there was a meeting of the Knesset today where they voted to agree to that demand of Trump. And so it sounds like what they're trying to do is I mean, I think that they were supposed to have like weekly detainee releases into the second phase. So now they're trying to say that they all need to be released in the first phase, which kind of, that's not the agreement. So that's concerning, and that's this Saturday. And then another thing that I wanted to touch on, yesterday, Hamas released a statement that Israel has violated the ceasefire agreement by continuing bombing. They're also not allowing people and supplies into North Gaza, like they said that they would. Particularly, they're not allowing any aid organizations or other governments um, to let in shelter for people. And as we've all seen, there's no shelter. So this is really concerning. Israel continues its assault on the West Bank, particularly in Jenin refugee camp. And so that's kind of what's going on over there. I wanted to touch briefly on what kind of is happening in Ohio related to this. The Ohio Secretary of State, it was announced a few days ago, reinvested 35 million in Israel bonds, and the state of Ohio now holds 265 million in Israel bonds. We've talked a little bit about this in our Signal chat, but last month a couple of us went to the Franklin County Treasurer's Investment Advisory Committee meeting and talked with her about this $5 million in bonds that were set to mature on February 1st. In that meeting, she did say that she didn't feel comfortable reinvesting the money with the credit ratings where they are. But she couldn't give us a firm answer about what she was going to do or when she was going to make that decision. In our bond coalition, we've been trying to get an update on this, but her office has not been very responsive. We've put in some Freedom of Information Act requests, so hopefully we get that information back soon, and we'll update everyone about that. Summit County and Lucas County in Ohio have pledged to not renew any Israel bonds as they mature, so they are basically promising that they will be doing the process of divesting completely. And because of that, our statewide bond effort was mentioned by the BDS movement in their most recent update, which is exciting to see, and hopefully we'll be able to add Franklin County to that. Excuse me. I put a new survey into our membership chat, and I'm going to repaste it again here. This is for our statewide bond conference that we're planning. We are looking at some new venues and new dates in May. And so we want to see, which date in May works the best for people. It is still going to be in Columbus or Columbus area. So we hope to have a lot of attendance from, excuse me, our JVP members. And we'd like people, if you're interested, to fill that out by Thursday. And that's in the chat now. And that is my update. And if anyone wants to add anything real quick, or we can just go into Reverend John's presentation.
Thank you, Allie.
Hello, am I up?
Yeah.
Okay,
Hello.
all right. Well, I am John Wagner. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and I've been at this kind of activism for some time. I'll share a little bit more personally if you like, well, a little bit later. But now I'd like to show a video that was created about 10 years ago. And what it shows is United Methodist missionaries and their concern for Palestine, for Israel, for the situation there. And it pretty much speaks for itself. The reason I like to show this is to demonstrate, first of all, that people who are activists have friends they didn't know they had in areas they didn't know they had. So just like Jewish Voice for Peace, people are sometimes astonished that they have Jewish allies. These are United Methodist missionaries, pretty conventional United Methodist missionaries who happen to be assigned to Israel and Palestine as their mission field. Second reason is that um, it helps to explain what happened on October 7th, that it was a long time coming, and that people who were on the ground and perceptive uh, could have predicted this and were not terribly shocked on October 7th. So I'm going to share this video now, and here we go. I'm learning how to do this. Can you all see it?
Yeah.
To all United Methodists around the world,
and to all United Methodist decision makers, both lay and clergy.
Greetings in the name of the Lord.
We are United Methodist missionaries.
We are trained and dedicated to representing the United Methodist Church worldwide.
We are considered progressive. We are considered conservatives.
we may hold to a very plain understanding of God's word, or we may cherish the word of God as spiritual communion, or both.
Some of us are active in political movements.
We stay away from politics if we can help it.
We have retired from the mission field, or we are still very much in it. And yet we all have something in common.
We have served the United Methodist Church in a place of moral and physical danger known as the Holy Land.
It has been our great privilege, and yet it has also been a great burden.
We have seen injustices many of you have not seen.
We have heard testimonies that many of you have not heard.
It is our duty to share what we have seen and heard with you. My name is Tina Whitehead, and I have been volunteering in the Holy Land since 2006. I came because of the plea of the Palestinians to share their story, and I stayed because I wanted to experience the story firsthand. Over the years, I've seen daily life become more and more difficult under an oppressive occupation, but I continue to be inspired by a people who refuse to give up hope.
I am Alex Awad. I have been a pastor here in Jerusalem. I taught at Bethlehem Bible College, and I run the Shepherd Society. But while I'm doing my ministerial work, I have seen the suffering of the people of this land. I have seen the settlements. I have seen the confiscation of land. I have seen the demolition of homes. I have seen the wall built since I have served in this land for many, many years. I can tell you as an eyewitness, I have seen so much injustice in this country. I and many Palestinian Christians call on you all around the world to come and stand with us, to come and be a voice for peace and justice for all the people of this land, whether they're Israelis or Palestinians. We don't want you to take sides, except we want you to take the side of justice and peace.
Hello, I am Kristen Brown, one of your United Methodist missionaries serving in Palestine and Israel. 20 years ago, I came here on a volunteer and mission team and met incredible people in Israel, in Palestine, in the West Bank. Several months ago, I joined a group of Palestinian Christians in this field behind me. We came to pray and share communion with each other. In the midst of praying the Lord's Prayer, I could barely continue as I heard in the background sounds of trees being uprooted, of olive trees, 100 to 2,000-year-old olive trees being uprooted. And for what? The farmers did not have the benefit of their last crops, as this was less than a month away from the final harvest that they might have had. And now a wall, a road, and land is being confiscated to make a green area for Israel, even though it is clearly in the Palestinian lands.
My name is Janet Lar Lewis. Over the course of 20 years, I've seen the situation deteriorate, and I've heard people who have visited the region come away changed after they learned the realities and become activists in their own countries.
Why am I advocating a nonviolent means for change in Palestine, Israel? Power in the way that world leaders and practice power does not bend so easily. I believe this is true whether we're talking about Palestinians or about Israelis or about ourselves. Sometimes we have to be put under some measure of pressure before we act. I'm concerned about Palestinian children and Israeli children and their mothers. This was true during my time of service in Palestine, Israel in 1989 to 1992. It is even truer now. Massive violence is a sign of massive weakness, massive despair, massive fear, and massive helplessness. If we are to show real power, all of us from our points of strength or perceived strength will have to learn how to bend. Stopping the continuing illegal occupation of Palestinian land is not a show of weakness, but a show of strength. We all need to rise from a situation that means nothing but death. Let there be a resurrection morning. Let there be a new day in the lives of Palestinian children and Israeli children and their mothers.
I am Brenda Awad, and I've been serving at Bethlehem Bible College for nearly 30 years in Bethlehem. I have recently retired from the mission field. And while serving here in Israel, Palestine, especially in Palestine, I have seen the progression of injustice due to the apartheid wall, due to Israeli bypass roads that restrict freedom of movement for Palestinians. And in general, I've just seen Palestinians losing hope as their lands are confiscated and just facing challenges that are seemingly insurmountable. But, you know, we are thankful that the church, especially the United Methodist Church, is standing in solidarity with these Christians and other Palestinians in the Holy Land. And especially, we have heard the cries of Palestinians for justice. We have talked with them daily, and we have seen that they have hopes, desires, and aspirations for a better future. And we ask you to stand with us as we lift up our brothers and sisters in Christ.
My name is Bob May, and I've seen horrible things. I've seen Israeli soldiers violently kicking handcuffed Palestinians as they lay face down in the dirt. I've seen dozens of Palestinian homes demolished and reduced to rubble. I've seen Israeli soldiers detain Palestinian children on their way home from school. I've seen the Israeli military bulldoze Palestinian farms and then use this farmland for Israeli settlements. I've seen the daily humiliations and indignities that the Palestinians suffer at the hands of the Israelis. I've seen the blank stares of my Palestinian students after they've been released from Israeli prisons. 6 months detention with no charge. I've been to the funeral of a 10-year-old Palestinian girl who was shot by Israeli soldiers. I've been to the candlelight service for Rachel Curry, an American that was crushed by the Israelis. I've seen Palestinians denied basic rights that are standard for Israelis. I've seen the water supply turned off for thirsty Palestinians so the Israeli settlers could fill their swimming pools and water their lawns.
We want you to know these things, and so do many of the Jews, Muslims, and Christians of the Holy Land.
Christians in particular are asking the churches of the world to find nonviolent means of addressing these concerns.
And the United Methodist Church is one of the churches being asked.
Time is running out for a just solution.
Hope is running out, especially for the most powerless people of the region.
As United Methodists, we can answer the call of Palestinian Christians.
We can visit the missions supported by our denomination.
We can contact and arrange to meet with missionaries currently serving.
We can cease buying products that sustain the occupation.
And we can take our money out of some of the companies that profit from the harsh occupation of Palestinian lands.
We are United Methodist missionaries,
Committed to finding nonviolent means
of bringing peace with justice to the people that we have grown to love.
We ask for your help. If we want peace in the Holy Land, and we are always praying for the peace of Jerusalem, let us start here. Let us ask the Israeli government to stop building these Jewish settlements. Work for peace. It's not enough to say we pray for peace. Be an active person to bring about God's justice and God's peace to the Holy Land. We want you to come one day to the Holy Land and to celebrate peace between Israelis and Palestinians. But until then, you need to work very hard to make that peace a reality. God bless you.
I'm going to go right into my presentation and we can talk a little bit more about this video if you like afterward. But now I'd like to share a little bit about my recent trip there and a little bit about how I got into this. So I'm going to share once again.
We'll have questions that come up during the presentation. You can put your questions in the chat or raise a hand and I'll try to remember everyone who has and we'll get to your questions after this presentation.
All right. Okay, I'm hoping this works. In 2008, I was asked to go to the Holy Land. The United Methodist missionaries you've seen just now arranged that. They were all there while I was there. I was one of the more skeptical ones in the trip. I was anxious for a more balanced presentation. I thought they were being unfair to Israel. But then I met people like Ahmed, who is here. He's a Palestinian Christian and student at Bethlehem Bible College. He shared what life was like under occupation for him, how, among other things, he had to wait long hours at checkpoints. And as a young Palestinian man, he was often harassed and had been beaten several times. Even so, he said it was his practice while waiting in line to pray for Israeli soldiers who would soon be interrogating him. This was powerful to me as a Christian. This is Mikhail Manikin, an Israeli veteran, a former lieutenant in the Golani Brigade of the IDF. He described some of the terrible things he saw that turned him against the occupation, how he became eventually a founder of Breaking the Silence, an organization of IDF veterans who are now working for a just settlement between Israelis and Palestinians. Someone in our group said to him, "If we say these things, you are saying back home, people will call us anti-Semites." And he replied, "They call me an anti-Semite and I'm Orthodox." And he pointed to his yarmulke. This is Bassam Aramin, a Palestinian Muslim and former insurgent who was jailed for 7 years. He befriended one of his Israeli jailers and helped form ex-combatants for peace with some of those same Israeli soldiers. When I was over there in 2008, he told us the story of how his 10-year-old daughter was killed while standing outside her school. An Israeli sniper did this without any provocation. But he also told us he was committed to a just peace, and he now is on a speaking tour with an Israeli man who lost a 14-year-old daughter to a suicide bomber. And some of you may have read about him. The most significant encounter for me personally, and this is back in 2008 again, occurred when I spent the night at the parish house of a Palestinian Catholic priest, Aziz. He's on the far right. In a personal conversation, I presumed to lecture him at length on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how he needed to be more understanding and sympathetic to Israelis because of the Holocaust. I blew my own horn for a little bit, told him that I'd studied post-Holocaust Jewish theology and literature in graduate school, that I'd visited Auschwitz as well. And I felt he needed to hear that perspective, but he finally held up his hand and gently shared that he knew about the Holocaust, had actually visited Auschwitz himself, but the fact remained he couldn't visit Jerusalem, his hometown, because of his race. I was embarrassed and now mark this as a major turning point in my thinking. When I returned, I connected with other United Methodists, and long story short, we helped our denomination divest from companies and institutions that make money off the occupation. These are our two most significant accomplishments. We divested from G4S, a private prison company, and then from 5 Israeli banks that financed the construction of illegal settlements in the West Bank on land that had supposedly been set aside for a future Palestinian state. Now, this is me just 4.5 months ago. I went over there again, this time to participate in protective presence, basically showing Israelis and Palestinians that we were willing to take a calculated risk to stand for justice. The trip was organized by Christians for Ceasefire and Rabbis for Ceasefire. Here we are standing outside the barrier to Gaza. We could hear bombs going off as we prayed. Our group included rabbis, nuns, pastors like myself, some American-born Palestinian Muslims, and a Hindu activist and a Buddhist activist. A few of us were chosen to visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This was my first visit. I remarked how serene the grounds around the mosque were, how spiritual it seemed. But Rabbi David Cooper in the front row with the blue shirt reminded me that by and large, Muslims are now restricted from visiting this third most holy site in Islam. In fact, we saw more Israeli soldiers than worshipers. This was astonishing to me. We did some protective presence in the West Bank. These villages are being regularly attacked by settlers. Basically, our visits consisted of going in the day, making our presence known as Westerners to the IDF and to the settlers who were clearly watching. This is a little boy with mental and emotional problems, greatly exacerbated by settlers coming into his home in the middle of the night, waking him and his family and screaming at them to vacate the land. Any physical resistance can result in collective punishments like beatings. We also saw where their livestock had been poisoned. And sometimes these people in these little villages are killed. This boy had a seizure while we were there. But I was able to interact with him. We eventually played a little game that children like to play. This is the one personal contribution I felt best about in my time there last year. I was terrifically impressed by the samud of the Palestinians I met. Samud is an Arabic word that means steadfastness or rootedness. They consider themselves rooted in the land like an olive tree. This man is committed to staying even at the risk of harm coming to his child. Again, so moving to me. This is Daoud Nasser. a Palestinian Christian and someone I've known now for several years. The entrance to his farm has a plaque which says in English, Arabic, and Hebrew, "We refuse to be enemies." He continues to battle legal challenges to the ownership of his property, even though the deed goes back nearly 100 years. Very impressive individual. We offered our support to him and his beleaguered family, some of whom have been physically assaulted. He's also had trees uprooted and crops destroyed. In nearly every village we visited, we met Israeli Jews who were doing a much more involved form of protective presence, including staying in these villages for a week at a time, staying overnight to help ward off attacks from the settlers. This young man resembled Jesus to me, both in appearance and attitude. The man in the white shirt in the foreground is Rabbi Avi DeBush, the leader of Rabbis for Human Rights. He's also a rabbi for the kibbutz near the Gaza border that was attacked on October 7th. He saw friends murdered, but he joined us in calling for an immediate ceasefire and release of all hostages, both Israelis in Gaza and those Palestinians who've been imprisoned without charge and have been used as bargaining chips. He is something of a liberal Zionist. He wants to maintain what he calls sovereignty in the land, Jewish sovereignty. This stance was criticized by a number of people in our group, but in the immediate crisis, he's found some acceptance as an ally, and I personally appreciated him and his presentation. Our most controversial action on the trip was demonstrating in front of the U.S. Embassy with our hands painted red to symbolize the fact that the U.S. has blood on its hands in giving Israel unlimited military aid. I can go into my personal difficulty with this kind of protest, but in the end, I participated. Some Orthodox Jews saw us and shouted out that we were hypocrites. I pondered this. Here is a visual representation of the well-documented genocide perpetrated over the centuries by European settlers in their conquest of this continent. There is indeed something hypocritical about us criticizing another country for doing some of the same things we did. And yet we must do this, in my opinion, since we have facilitated this dreadful and deadly occupation. Here is a now famous illustration of the history since 1947. The image at the far right shows just how much territory has been taken over, and I think even more now since this was created. Our group met with a Palestinian Israeli politician, Sami Abu Shahada. The Israeli Knesset does allow some Palestinian representation, and Sami was briefly a member. He shared his views about the occupation of his land and how Netanyahu has maintained control. He acknowledged and commended those Israeli Jews who have joined in the cause of justice, but observed that there are just too few of them. He cautioned against extreme rhetoric, told us that as activists we need to be strategic as we reach out to average Americans, but he also strongly endorsed BDS, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, saying they are both moral and nonviolent means to a just political solution. Christians like myself have gotten our churches to divest from the occupation. It's not generally known or well publicized, but United Methodists, Presbyterians, the United Church of Christ, as well as historic peace churches, Mennonites, Church of the Brethren, and Quakers have, after deliberate and reasoned debate, divested in some fashion over the past 10 years. Students asking their universities and colleges to consider divesting are therefore not doing anything all that radical in most cases, in my opinion. But communicating this is a challenge. Here's what the Ohio legislature has done, similar to what 35 other U.S. states have done, namely to declare that divesting and boycotting from Israel is a form of anti-Semitism and should be criminalized. And this is the latest challenge. Hundreds of Palestinians far from Gaza have been killed since the war began, hundreds. This aspect of the conflict, largely unreported, has now moved into the West Bank. And I'm going to stop there. And if you have any questions or observations, I'd be glad to be a part of that discussion.
Thank you, John, for sharing that. If anyone has any questions, if you want to type it in the chat or raise your hand. Those were really powerful pictures. I'm feeling emotional, particularly about that story of the young boy. I have two young boys, and just imagining a young boy having to live his life like that is just hard. Does anyone have any questions? I have a question. If you could talk more about the protective presence trips. Oh, I see. I'll get to my question next. I see Homa has a question. So Homa.
Hi, good evening, Reverend, and thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed your presentation. It was really thought-provoking. And my question is, I'm curious about your ideas before you went to Palestine. You talked about how the trip really changed your point of view. And I was wondering, where did your, I don't know, maybe bias come from? Like, why did you feel that, or what sort of information or maybe a predisposition did you have in the beginning before you went there that gave you your initial point of view that the Israelis were being maybe misrepresented? This would maybe help us in our conversations with people here who haven't been there, and how to, have some of those difficult conversations. Thank you.
That's a great question. First of all, I would say that I wasn't pro-Israel. I wouldn't call it myself that. I wasn't quite that way, but I did believe that there should be balance. I tend to be a kind of moderate in a lot of ways. I like to hear both sides. I'm as a pastor, it's important to maintain relationships with people on all sides of issues. I've mostly served congregations that were more conservative than mine, and I wanted to hear their point of view and at least consider them. And so I did study post-Holocaust Jewish literature and theology. I did go to Auschwitz. I had Jewish roommates in college, and that made an impact on me. So I felt like I flattered myself that I knew more than other people. So the group was about 100 folks, and I was the one who kept insisting that we hear from settlers, hear from Israelis, and we didn't hear from all that many, but the evidence was just so overwhelming in the end that I just turned around. I think that I think a more helpful answer perhaps is that people are guarded. They don't want to lose friendships with Jews they've come to know. People like me, Christians, are often proud of having Jewish friends. It's a mark of open-mindedness and that kind of thing. I have a rabbi friend I talked to today. So it's something that a lot of Christians like me have a problem with. The other aspect, of course, is Christian Zionism, which is a real thing. It is embraced by people who have a more conservative faith than I do. Um, uh, it's evangelicals, of course. I actually helped to co-moderate a website of evangelical scholars who've turned against Christian Zionism and are trying to persuade other evangelicals that this is wrong. This is a wrong view of the Bible. The other kind of Christian Zionism, I don't know if it's called Christian Zionism, but it's something that a Jewish theologian, Mark Ellis, brought up, and others have echoed it. He called it the ecumenical deal. It's really the interfaith deal, and that is that Christians receive absolution for the crimes against Jewish people if they support Israel. It's a very transactional point of view. And I think I was a part of that to some degree before I went.
Can you share that website? That sounds really interesting.
I surely will.
Okay, thank you. And I see Tall has his hand up.
Hi, thanks a lot for sharing your talk. And I something you were just saying in answering this question made me think of sort of like the other side of the challenge. What's you mentioned this rabbi that you were sort of able to work with despite disagreements, who you described as a liberal Zionist, who is sort of still attached to this idea of Jewish sovereignty, as you put it. And I feel like it's that kind of mindset of sort of like humanitarian minded people who, for some reason, in the Jewish community, I should say, who feel attached to like Jewishness as a political entity, I guess. And despite their all their other ethics maybe not seeming consistent with Israel. And I'm wondering how you make sense of the mindset of this friend you were working with, and I guess others like that, because it's a fairly common position. But I really think an important challenge within the Jewish community for those of us who are trying to work on this to overcome that mindset.
Just to be clear, I don't know Rabbi Avi DeBush personally. I was talking about another rabbi I know, but I'll talk about him. There were some people who stayed on the bus. They wouldn't go in to meet him. They'd heard about him and considered this normalization, going into just even be with him and sitting down and talking about mutual concerns. I felt, and just keep in mind, we were at that kibbutz while we were listening to him. We could still hear the bombs going off as we were doing the presentation, or his doing his presentation, and just the horror of that makes you think, geez, any ally is okay. Just if we can just get this stopped now, and then we can talk about some other things in the future. So that was kind of the mindset of our group going in. I also appreciated the fact that he was, taking what amounts to a pretty brave stand in Israel itself. The other rabbi I spoke to that I talked about today is somebody who does not want to be named. He lost his job for speaking out against the occupation. He went over there and came back and told his synagogue that it looks like apartheid to me, and he was out within a few months. He's very shy about speaking against other Jews or anything like that. But when he's with congregations or Jewish people, he's very forceful. And I begged him to speak. I'd actually got him to speak to the New York Times, but they had to quote him anonymously. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there's, I guess, it involves both the issue of normalization, which I think is a real concern, as well as the fact that, just to make sure I understand your question properly, is that, why we would, I think I guess for me, anybody who takes a step outside of what's normal, I want to commend and encourage. And same with that Rabbi Avi DeBush, who was, again, is not a personal friend, but I was impressed with him.
Charlene has a question in the chat. She says, it sounds like you were in Israel, the West Bank, maybe Gaza since October 7th. Can you talk more about the peace movement in Israel and press coverage in Israel media? And then an additional question, she says, did the Jewish Zionist rabbi change his position at all as the devastating bombing of Gaza continued?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't think I'm going to give you a great answer here. The information I've gotten about the peace movement in Israel is all secondhand. Well, I can share a few things. One of the things I didn't put in my presentation that was astonishing to me is that one evening a group of anti-Zionist Jews came to visit us. They were all rabbinical students. they felt free to live and work in Israel and do it so publicly. This is something I don't think is confined to churches and Christianity. The two groups had similar ideas, but split over leadership. And so there's two small groups of anti-Zionist Jews who meet for worship, and they're across the street from each other. So that was kind of odd to me, but actually familiar as a Christian because we split up all the time. But I think just that was about the only thing that I got, that there was an impression of the peace movement in Israel is that it does maintain some aspects of a liberal democracy and does allow for people like this to live and work and to express their views. As far as again, this rabbi changing his position, I didn't sense that he had any evolution in his position since October 7th. He just maintained an anti-occupation stance while at the same time wanting Israel to be, a Jewish state in some form. And it was unclear to me what exactly he meant about that. And I think it was unclear to him as well. I hope that answers some of your question.
That's interesting. I feel like whenever I've heard of, like somebody with that sort of, I guess, stance on things, it's funny. I think to myself, I'm confused about what they really believe, and they seem confused. So that seems to be, because it's hard to kind of reconcile the idea of having a Jewish state when it's supposed to exist where it's other people's homes. So yeah, that's really interesting.
That was a tense conversation.
Yeah. Could you talk a little more about I guess for people who might be interested in getting involved in protective presence, what that process is like and how people can find more information about that?
I put my email in the chat, and there is a contact with Rabbis for Ceasefire. They may not have that name any longer, but a woman who was featured on Canary Mission, I'm assuming you all know about that, was the organizer. She was with us, just a great organizer. And I can put you in touch with her if you're interested in this. She's not a rabbi. It was, I think, I don't know what kind of, and I've tried to find out the organization that organized those Jewish Israelis. I actually wrote to them and they didn't get back to me with, I'm not surprised at that because there's so much suspicion about, who's inquiring and so forth. But, there are groups, and maybe Hannah, well, I shouldn't have said her name. Maybe she would know a little bit more about how to do that. So my email is in the chat. Please contact me about that.
It looks like we have a question from Sam.
Thanks. Yeah, I really enjoyed that presentation. I feel like, and this is true for myself too, and a lot of the folks I know who have, changed their minds about apartheid and the occupation, that like actually going and seeing it in person has been really affecting. I'm curious if you found that like sharing your firsthand experience and these videos and everything like that has been helpful in sort of, changing people's opinions if they haven't had the opportunity to see things on themselves.
That's a really great question. I don't think that a presentation like this has as much impact as you'd like to think it would. I mean, I've shown this video. I helped to produce it for years now, and trying to get people in my denomination, the United Methodists, to change. I've made speeches in We've proposed resolutions, around divestment and boycotts. But I really think the impact of going over there is irreplaceable. And once people see it, they change. I know that people have been persuaded to go based on what I've been saying, and then it's pretty firm. I'll give you one example, just extraordinary, and I didn't put this in my presentation. There was a woman on our trip who was, she came along with her husband, who was a retired Air Force colonel. He'd had some suspicions. He'd been involved in arms sales, and he wanted to go. This is in 2008. He wanted to go and kind of see it another view, take another view. So he had some suspicions himself. His wife, however, was a true Christian Zionist, and even with the weight limit, she managed to bring 4 heavy books by Christian Zionists, including John Hagee, whom I'm sure you know that name. He's the head of Christians United for Israel. And she was there to investigate and, make sure that we didn't say anything wrong. She spent one night with a Palestinian family, and the next day she wrote on the wall, "God hates this wall." Just took one night with a Palestinian Christian family. And Palestinian Christians, even though they represent a tiny, tiny minority, dwindling minority in Israel and Palestine, nevertheless have huge persuasive power. When we meet fellow Christians who basically confirm all that we've been hearing, it makes a huge difference. So they know they have a key role in persuading folks to change. But to answer your question very directly, I wish I had, more persuasive abilities. And some people can do it, but the best folks are really Palestinian Christians. And sometimes they do tours here. That often there are people coming through, but the ones who are the most effective are seen in their homeland. Does that help, Sam?
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think there's something so interesting about just give anyone exposure, being around these people and understanding them as humans makes a huge difference. So.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to, well, Ali and I were talking about and I guess Peter Beinart had a podcast today or yesterday about the banality of evil. Hannah Arendt's expression about how ordinary people can carry evil within them that they don't know about or allow it to fester or to grow. I think that's true, but I also think just the opposite is true as well, that people have some inherent goodness. They'd like to be on the side of righteousness if they can. And, I'll bet you 9 out of 10 people who saw that little boy in that village and saw him with his head bowed. The rest of the group was playing soccer. All the other children in the group were playing soccer. I can't play soccer anymore. But so I just sat with this little boy. I mean, being, just terrorized, traumatized by this, I think their hearts would go out to them, to, children like that. And, we've had this, I was in a discussion today with an interfaith group about how to get the testimonies or visuals about children out in front of people. That seems to be the most affecting.
We have a question in the chat from Jane. She says, is the Methodist Church united in this stand against the occupation, and what are its plans going forward?
That's a very interesting question to me. All of the divestments that the United Methodist Church has done happened before our split over human sexuality. There's a global Methodist Church now that's conservative on human sexuality and theology. But prior to that, I had allies on the theologically conservative side within United Methodism who were instrumental in getting these resolutions passed, getting this divestment to happen. And they were, again, just persuaded by seeing it themselves. So I think there's a I think we were united, at least among the leadership. One of the problems, of course, is the so-called people in the pews are impacted less by what the denomination says and more about what they read and hear on television. And I'm retired now, and I am serving a little tiny church, country church, part-time. And a lot of these people, I would say, whether they know it or not, are really Christian Zionists. And so we have not succeeded in getting them persuaded about something I know they would be against if they were able to see it. So the answer is we are probably not as united as we'd like to think. Plans going forward. Last April, we passed a resolution that encouraged the divestment of Israel bonds from the United Methodist Church. Years ago, they were purchased. Our Board of Pensions that does control most of our investments is pledged to look at those and review them, and I have a feeling they won't renew them. So, I think going forward, there's those kind of victories, but getting the average United Methodist persuaded, the average Christian persuaded is difficult.
Looks like Farrell has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Reverend, how are you feeling, personally these days?
Well, I don't know. I think your guess, I don't know what Trump's going to do day to day. I don't think he does. So who knows about that? I think it exposes something that has been underlying U.S. policy for decades. And so in that sense, of course, I appreciate it. But, and how I'm feeling these days, I'm fighting some despair and depression like a lot of people. I'll just leave it at that.
I would recommend, of course, that you join JVP.
Okay. I've joined a lot of groups, but I'll consider it. My friend Connie Hammond, who's been with us all the way, she's a United Methodist, if you didn't know, has encouraged that for a number of us. And I've known Farrell now for many years, and I want to say, since I've got you, I don't know how many of you are Jewish, but you're so appreciated by other activists. When you show up, when you do your testimonies, when you encourage us, it makes all the difference in the world, because we all, I think, all of us non-Jews have this fear of being called anti-Semites, and to have someone affirm what we're doing, recognizing that we are not that, we're not anti-Jewish, makes a big difference. So the work you're doing is very important. The witnesses you're doing in Columbus and Washington, D.C. are extraordinarily important. So thank you for that. And that is heartening to me. That helps me.
In our chapter, I feel very proud that we have really a real diversity of religious background and ethnic background, and it just really is a testament to how just kind of basic this fight is. It's very easy to understand once you get it, and it's something that really can hold so many different kinds of people together in solidarity. So and that's one reason why we really appreciate hearing from you, Reverend John, and your perspective. Looks like Colin has a question in the chat. You think American treatment of indigenous people in the 19th century is comparable to Israel's treatment of Palestinians today? Consider that decolonization was just getting started in 1948 and was well on its way worldwide by the time Israel completed its occupation in 1967.
Okay. Decolonization was just getting started in 1948, or colonization was just getting started? Scott, can you clarify that for me? Or Colin, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah, I'm referring to decolonization specifically, because I may have misunderstood the point you were making when you introduced the slide showing the basically the destruction of the indigenous population in the United States. And some people use that as kind of a partial explanation of, well, this is just the way history is. We've all done it. And my point is simply that, 150 years later, the whole world was changing, and colonization was on the way out, and
Right.
continues to be the standard value, today. And but I've heard people before say, well, look, some more conservative Jews, for example, and Christians as well, will say, we've all been guilty of that. Look, look what you did to the Indians.
Right.
We're just protecting our interests and doing what we need to do to build the country we need to build for ourselves. I'm just saying the two aren't comparable. I'm just asking if you kind of have a.
That you're right. I painted with a broad brush there. And what I'm trying to say is that I guess I've become more and more aware of what the United States has done, what Americans and Europeans have done to people around the world. As part of this, I've become educated on this. I was part of a webinar you can still find on United Methodist sites about the doctrine of discovery. I'm sure you're aware of that. And that was the idea that I think a pope had at one point, that all these primitive peoples were allowed to be eradicated or moved because they weren't Christians. I think we have to accept our role in that mindset. But I think you're right. Colonizing other people is so, 18th, 19th century. So I have to agree with you. I think, and I'm not trying to absolve Israel at all. I think in some ways what they're doing is worse, just considering it's in the 21st century.
Yeah. Agreed. Thank you.
Sure.
It on that note, it really struck me what when you were there, what somebody said to you about, you're a hypocrite kind of thing. It seems like it's like a whataboutism. It's like you're not allowed to care about what's happening here right now because look at what your country did. Well, we could all do more to be in solidarity with the indigenous people here, of course, but like it doesn't make what's happening in Palestine less terrible. So yeah.
I think I've been in conversations with people who just, well, even while we were over there, somebody just started screaming at us in a restaurant. One of the people on our trip was wearing a T-shirt that said "Arms embargo now," and this guy saw it and just went berserk. And it would also happen to be the day after 6 Israelis were found shot in a tunnel. So we were there at that point, and this was they had been killed by Hamas, I suppose. I think there's uh, pointing out somebody's hypocrisy, and I don't know any more than anybody else really, but as a pastor, when you point out someone's hypocrisy and it's really clear, there can be tremendous anger, and people don't know what to do with it. Um, I think there's, I thought of those Orthodox Jews who pass by us and, think, well, they must know something. I mean, they've been steeped in Jewish moral teachings. They've got to know something about this. And their only defense is to say that we're hypocrites because we do it too. And this both sidesism, ultimately they know it doesn't work. Everybody knows it doesn't work. I mean, you just can't do that. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Who said that? Was that Gandhi or somebody else? Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be a sage on this issue or all these other issues. I mean, you know what makes people angry, and you've been working with fellow Jews about this for years, so you know what's going on. Farrell.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, how much I thank you for your honesty. It's absolutely an important aspect of what you're doing, what you probably have done for a long time. And I appreciate that very much. And we appreciate what you have done this evening. It's unusual to have someone speak so personally and so honestly. So that's really a good experience for all of us. Thank you.
You're sure welcome. And again, I'd be glad to be in touch with any of you. It's a small group, so I tend to get back to people pretty quickly. One of the things I like to do the most is connect people to activism. And if I can help in any way, I've become pretty familiar with, very familiar with Christian activism in the United States around this issue. But I also have connections with, some of the other groups and with the BDS group. One of my proudest achievements was to have Omar Barghouti shake my hand and congratulate us on some divestment that the United Methodist Church had achieved. And that meant a lot to me. Do you all know who he is? He's the head of, okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Could you say who he is? I don't know
Yeah,
who he is.
thank you.
Omar Barghouti is the kind of the brains behind the BDS movement. He wrote a book on BDS some years ago, and he's the director of the BDS National Committee, the BNC. And he is, I just responded so positively, personally, to the idea of nonviolent and moral action similar to what happened with, some similarities to the Montgomery bus boycott, some similarities to the fight against apartheid, using economic pressure to just change the situation. And that's who Omar Barghouti is, and he's you can look him up easily.
Yeah, we watched Tall in a meeting a couple months ago in one of our members meeting. We watched a video that he gave, or a speech that he had given about BDS. And I'm trying to find, he wrote.
Right. I remember that. It was very impactful. I knew I recognized the name. I just wasn't able to place it.
And here, oh, I'm trying to do it. I'm just linking a book that he wrote about BDS that I have this book. I turn to it a lot when we're, in the past year and a half, especially since we're working on, the divestment part of BDS here in Ohio. So it's a really informative and interesting book, and gives a lot of history and like where he drew inspiration from, like South Africa, and coming up with the idea of BDS. So do we have any more questions for the Reverend before we let everyone go for the night.
Again, what a privilege to be asked to be with you. It means a lot to me, and just a great privilege. And you know, and I wish you all the best. I've been trying to work with a group of Jews in Cincinnati and Dayton. They're meeting together. They have a Sabbath celebration together now. But you're the most organized group that I've been able to encounter in Ohio. How organized is it in the Cleveland area? Do you know?
There's a Cleveland JVP, and they're pretty organized. I think we know a lot of their members, and we work closely with them on various things. I think they're a little bit smaller than our group here in Columbus. But yeah, they're doing a lot of stuff up there as well. So it's really nice to see. And hopefully we'll see you for this bond conference. And we're, I know the Cincinnati group is going to be joining us, and Cleveland, Akron, Toledo. So, a lot of people from around the state, Jewish, Muslim, Christian groups, like student groups. We have faculty and staff of for Justice in Palestine at OSU and in other chapters. So I think it's really exciting that we're going to get, such a great coalition together, and that we get to work with everyone, and you too in the future. And hopefully we can keep in touch. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll leave you now and you can talk freely. Okay. Adios.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Have a good night. We'll see everyone next month.
Bye-bye.